All right, everyone, we're going to get started now. So please help me welcome Melissa. She is one of our alum and Kyle as well. And they're going to give us some insight on how to be successful in your fellowship application process, but very much more focused on the PMF fellowship application process. So I'll hand it over to Melissa and Kyle, and I'll be here if anyone needs anything.
Hi, I'm Melissa. I graduated from the School of Public Health in Health Policy Administration in 2023. I also received a certificate in Public Health Informatics while I was here. I spent 6 years at UIC in the Clinical Services and Psychopharmacology Department. And I was just recently in February 2023, named a finalist, a PMF finalist. Currently going through the appointment process. I recently just accepted an offer from the CDC in the National Center for Environmental Health. Really exciting. Kyle, do you want to introduce yourself? You're muted.
Hi, can everyone hear me now? I always forget about the Zoom mute. But hi, everyone. My name is Kyle DeVry. I am a 2020 grad of the UIC College of Urban Policy and Public Affairs, or CUPPA. Since 2020, before I applied for the PMF program in 2021, I got into the Health and Human Services Center for Medicare and Medicaid Services, CMS, in the fall of 2022. And I am based in Chicago working for CMS. Prior to applying for the PMF and getting into HHS, I had worked for UI Health for about 2 years full-time and about 2 years as a grad student working in the Clinical Research Finance Office, helping teams get started with Epic and reviewing clinical trials, and then hopped over into federal government in the fall of 2022.
Awesome. Laura, did you want us to go through some of the questions you had prepared, or?
Yeah, sorry, I was having trouble unmuting myself. Yeah, so if you can share some of your experience in regards to the application process, more specifically, maybe some things that really helped your resume or your application stand out, and like how were you able to manage applying for the PMF while you were a student and juggling maybe an internship or student organizations and things like that?
Yeah, when I was applying, one thing that I really focused on was the resume, because that makes up quite a big portion of your application for the PMF. When I was applying, it's the same as it is this year. It was the resume. I think you send in your transcripts, and as well as doing the 2 different like behavioral assessments. So I really focused on making sure I had a pretty good federal resume together. I tried to go through different resources I found online to make sure that I had something good to go and make sure that all my bullet points were like really strongly worded. You don't need a federal resume in order to apply, but I thought it was helpful just because I planned on applying to federal jobs regardless. And in terms of the behavioral assessment, I really tried to focus on the traits that the PMF program focuses on. I felt like that was pretty helpful when I was going through the process.
For me, when I applied, so how I found out about the program was a colleague of mine from CUPPA did reach out to me regarding about applying for the PMF program. I was interested in hopping over to the federal side and was really interested, and took some time to update my resume, talk to other UIC CUPPA alumni and in terms of their experience with the program. Took some time to work on updating the resume, working on behavioral assessment in the writing portion, and was able to review and apply for the program. I think what also helped is kind of noting my professional experience working and collaborating with teams, in addition to just project management experience, which made assisted in helping my resume stand out. I believe now, and feel free to correct me if I'm wrong, Melissa, that for the PMF application now, there's also an interview portion. So I believe there is, I don't believe in 2021 that applied for the application process, but just making sure, just speaking about experiences of working with data, working with teams, in terms of speaking with the PMF committee in terms of the in terms of the interview.
Yeah, there is an interview process now. And it's once you're selected as a semifinalist, I think they knocked it down to like, I think from 10,000 to 2,000 my year. And once you do that, they like give you a really good rundown in the PMF handbook of like potential questions. I would say like prepare potential star questions. They give you examples in the handbook, and just making sure you kind of answer in those in that way. And once again, keeping in mind the different traits of PMFs that they kind of focus on throughout the program.
Wonderful. So this is a question, I guess, for either of you. You mentioned that you created a federal resume. So for those of those who are not familiar with what the difference is between a federal resume and a regular resume, can you briefly describe that for us?
Yeah, I feel like in public health, we usually held to like the 2-page resume, but federal resumes can be so long. And it really depends on what the agency is looking for. But you can really list all of the health, like all of the work experience you've had, your publications, for certain federal resumes. I even listed like projects that I worked on throughout my MPH, which was really helpful for like my CDC application specifically. Different agencies look for different lengths. So for example, I know CDC was like maxing out at 5, but other agencies, there's like no limit to them.
So from my experience with using the federal resume as opposed to the regular resume, when I applied for the PMF application, I was able to use my regular resume. And then I did utilize USA Jobs, which allows you to have at least 5 resumes in your profile once you create it to send out to different agencies, departments, and divisions. So you do probably want to have at least a resume of about 1 to 2, 3 pages length, just to have your experience, educational and career experience as well. And then once you hop over to the federal side, often with carving a federal resume, you probably will be asked to put on your grade scale or pay grade scale, just to include where you are in terms of the ranking, in terms of your division or department. And then usually on your resume, you would probably list your supervisor and then position or location position, as well as salary regarding the federal resume.
Awesome. I'm not sure if either of you are familiar or if you're able to, can you explain what the GS levels are in terms of salary and benefits, or is that something that you're not super familiar with yet?
I can take a crack at it. So with the grade scale, or GS for short, that's basically the pay scale and rating employees, whether they're from the PMF or the pathways coming to federal government. And that's the scale they're at before any professional review by their supervisor, or any before any possibility of promotion or upgrade to a different pay scale. The GS scale also depends on geographic region. So whether you apply for a position and it get grade scale, if in Illinois and the Midwest, it'll be a little bit different. If you get a grade scale and got hired into the federal government and got a different grade scale in the New York area or the DC area, it really depends on geographic region. Typically, most PMFs, and this is from speaking with other UIC alumni, other PMFs, they usually come in on a GS9 scale for each of their departments or divisions. I know for speaking with other PMFs, they've come in on a GS11 with possibility of other promotion to a GS12 or a GS13. I believe the highest grade scale is around a GS15, but most PMFs, as well as people that go into the pathways, come in at a GS9 level. And usually about halfway in, or after the conversion period is finished after 2 years, most PMFs do convert from a GS9, a GS11 to a GS12 or 13.
Yeah, I feel like that was a really solid summary. I know that like certain PMFs have gone up to a GS12 when they start, but it's usually people with like pretty significant work experience. So it's not impossible, but it is harder, I would say.
Wonderful. Any questions so far? I know I'm like asking all the questions, but I want to leave room for other people to ask. Okay. Well, feel free to use a chat box and I'll read them out loud for you. So question, what initially drew you to apply for this specific fellowship, and were there other fellowships that you considered?
This was the only fellowship that I had applied to. It was something that I was really interested in getting into federal work, federal policy work specifically. So I first kind of like spoke to different professors, for example, Dr. Betsy Porter and Dr. Shrieky in the HPA division, and kind of like asked like what would be the best kind of option for me. And they talked about like ORISE fellowships, which are pretty common, and the PMF. They was told that PMF is like really competitive. So I applied, just thinking, why not? I also spoke to certain connections I had from undergrad. I had a few friends who were PMFs, who were like a few like graduated a little bit of like before me. And hearing about their experiences, whether it was within HHS or outside of HHS, was really helpful in kind of determining like what the experience would be like, what potential benefits I could get. One thing that really stood out to me was the amount of training you get, which feels like it would be a really great help like in kind of launching my career, but also the opportunity to have a rotation, like a 4 to 6 month rotation at a different agency. That feels like a great way to experience multiple parts of the federal government. And those were the kinds of things that sold me on it.
So what had sold me and got me interested is from an early age and kind of early on in my undergrad, I had an interest in kind of working in the federal government and using my skills to kind of assist people on the ground in different communities, whether that be through public health or housing, in terms of just developing program management for the policies that HUD and HHS has. When I was working for UI Health, I had previously applied for a fellowship with the Illinois state government back in 2020, was working for a few years with UI Health, and then a colleague of mine did inform me about the PMF program. And for people who are interested in applying for the PMF program, they have a 2-year, I believe, grace period for once you graduate from graduate studies to apply for a PMF program. So I looked at the application, figured why not? Actually 2 years ago, September of 21, and applied for the program and figured it'd be a good way to get into federal government.
Awesome. Okay, so what aspects of this fellowship are you most excited about? Like, what kind of things should someone be looking forward to?
Yeah, I feel like there's a lot of different things that are exciting. I think the different kinds of positions you can get are really cool. There's quite a lot of different ones within all sorts of different agencies. I would say that public health specifically, there's like HHS, I think, is one of the biggest employers of PMFs, if I'm not incorrect. And there's a lot of different opportunities, whether it's something like a budget analyst or more like on the project management policy. There's a lot of different opportunities, which is great. And I feel like there's a lot of different like benefits you can get, whether it's like mentorship. That's one thing I'm really excited about. But also in my specific position, I'm really excited to learn more about how policy works within CDC, just because initially when I was in my public health program, that wasn't something I like really thought about when I thought CDC was policy. And I'll be working specifically in environmental health policy, which is a really booming field. So lots of things to be excited about.
What got me excited is kind of the ability to kind of work side by side with people and just be at the front end of just how policy is implemented, how programs are started and created, and kind of just seeing, how the sausage works in terms of being on the front end and kind of learning the regulations, the writing process, how the data goes in and creates policy. So within my role at CMS, I work on a program called the No Surprises Act. And kind of break it down, it's law that was passed late 2020. And if you go to an out-network hospital or facility and you get an out-network fee, we work on the program to make sure consumers don't have to pay those out-network fees, and hospitals, facilities, insurance providers kind of work through an insider baseball process online to determine who's going to pay for the consumer's charges. So it's really interesting in learning how the policy and regulations go in creating and running the program, and then kind of working with contractors and how things get tested, things get reviewed, and kind of being on the front end of working with third parties and providers on rolling out the program.
Thank you so much. And someone asked when the application process begins and when it closed. I put it in the chat box, but I just wanted to say it out loud. September 12th is when the application opens and it closes on the 25th. So it's a really quick turnaround. I would recommend that you start working on your resume as soon as possible, and any other application materials that they might be asking for. And that kind of goes into my question. What kind of application materials did you need to submit aside from a resume?
Yeah, I can start off with this question. In addition with the resume, also reaching out to your graduate and undergrad admission offices for the transcript. I believe it was the official transcript. So just having a couple business days ahead in terms of reaching out to your graduate and undergrad offices, admission offices, and getting the transcript information. In addition, I believe there were 2 letters of recommendation that were needed from professors, people that are close to you, people, supervisors that you work under, and just making sure they're able to have a good understanding of who you are, your background, and why you should apply for the program. So always have time to reach out to people that you know that can speak highly of you, and getting a letter of recommendation sent out. In addition, with the application, I believe there's 2 behavioral assessments that kind of guide you in terms of how you would react in certain situations, such as developing projects, meeting deadlines, collaborating with teams. I imagine there'll be questions that do discuss working from home, working remotely, as opposed to working in an office. And then there's also I believe there was a written assessment. I think it was timed about 35 minutes regarding just meeting deadlines, collaborating with teams. In addition, just being prepared for like phone interview portion of the application. But those were the main things I do remember needing to be ready and available for applying for that program.
Yeah, definitely agree about transcripts, and getting those in earlier is much easier. I think beyond that, because I had not finished my graduate degree, I needed to submit like a letter from the School of Public Health or from whatever university, stating that I would be graduating by like X date, just so the PMF program had that on file. It's usually pretty quick for the program to turn that around. It's not a strange ask. Yeah, I also had the 2 behavioral tests, really stressing teamwork, things like that. I would say like generally pretty standard workplace behavioral assessments, nothing to be scared of, but they do take quite a while, if I remember correctly, like at least an hour each. And then later I had the interview where I like really prepared interview questions beforehand.
Awesome. And then Melissa, you mentioned that you had to go through an interview process. Can you tell us a little bit more about that? Maybe what kind of questions you received or anything that really stood out to you?
Sure. So it was an interesting interview process because they're trying to avoid bias. It's all through the phone, and you aren't allowed to say things like your name or where you went to school, what your degree was in. It was nothing like I'd experienced before. And they have like standard questions for each of the interviews. I would say that the PMF handbook does a really good job at giving examples of the types of interview questions. In the handbook, it describes like STAR questions. So like you encounter this situation, what would you do? And then they have more like elaborate scenarios, I would say. And they usually preface it with a specific like PMF like trait, which they like really reiterate throughout the handbook. I would say like making sure you're prepared for various STAR questions is always helpful for any interview process, but particularly this one. it was a pretty short interview. It was all timed. It was about 30 minutes. A little bit stressful, but it went okay.
All right, that's good to hear. Anyone else have questions that they want to ask during the session? Okay. So this question is for both of you. How do you envision this fellowship shaping your career or future plans?
So I'll say I start off with this question. In terms of just developing where I want to go, it's certainly in my role, kind of developing what I want to do or what I want to work with. If I'm going to continue forward with working in the federal government, as Melissa had mentioned, there are opportunities to work with a different agency, department, division that's outside your home agency for around 4 to 6 months to expand your horizons within the federal government and kind of work in a different area or portfolio that you were previously not introduced to or what you initially started with in your home division. Currently, I'm working through the process of applying for or looking for different rotations right now, but it gives you the opportunity to work in a different area that you would previously not have known within the federal government, and then kind of be able to job shadow, work with other people in terms of understanding different programs and kind of knowing the back end of what goes into developing regulations, policy, and kind of standing up different programs for reviewing resources, reviewing documents, and kind of working with contractors in different areas. So it's giving me a whole kind of new window and kind of understanding how project management works and to be efficient and kind of understanding the importance of data behind, especially in healthcare and what we do, and kind of helping me understand moving towards kind of an area in project management. That could be within healthcare, or it could be in another area, but it's definitely showing me how to maintain teams, work with teams, and collaborate with others in the field of project management.
I would say that I'm in a slightly different place in my PMF journey because Kyle has already been there for quite a bit and I am just starting. But I would say part of this is just kind of developing a career trajectory. Like I am really excited about getting to work in policy because that's what I went to school for. But I want to make sure that that's actually where I want to be and gain good experience to take me through that journey. I'm excited to get to do rotation in other parts of the federal government to see, sorry, my cat is over here being a lot, get experience in other parts of the federal government to learn like different parts of policy. For example, I'd love to learn more about rulemaking. That would be a really cool experience. So I think what I'm mostly excited about is kind of developing those kinds of future goals for my career, whether it will be still in the federal government or outside of it.
Awesome. And Kyle, can you describe a little bit of your experience with the mentorship component? My understanding is that typically you're assigned with a mentor and they kind of help you through your career journey.
Yeah, definitely. So, and it really depends on which agency, department, or division you're in. But my process in terms of working with my mentor, it was less ad hoc, but more of a lax process of speaking with my supervisor at the time and kind of knowing my interests, my background, and working and seeing with other people within the department I'm in if it matches with their experience. So when I got my mentor, I believe it was early this year, probably late February, early March, before meeting and kind of being introduced to my mentor, my supervisor kind of made an introductory email, just talk about my experiences, and then see if it was a good fit after speaking with my supervisor for a couple of times over Zoom. And then me and my supervisor meet every month or every couple of weeks just to check in and see how things are and kind of working and seeing if I'm meeting objectives, kind of understanding the lay of the land in terms of my division, any other things to check in, and as well as regarding a rotation program, speaking and finding contacts with people he may know in other agencies and kind of starting a connection with them as well. So it's definitely the mentor program is what you make of it in terms of reaching out to supervisors and determining who's going to be the best mentor for you, but it also determines on based on your knowledge and experience and what you want to do.
That's great. Okay, so I don't want to keep everybody here just for the sake of time, but is there anything else that you feel like you wish you would have known before applying, or you wish you would have done before applying, or in preparation to your application that you would like to share?
I think how
Sure.
long the, oh, sorry.
Okay, go ahead. Go ahead.
Sure. I think how long the process can be after being selected as a PMF. The federal hiring process is really long. And for context, the position I applied for, I think I applied for at the end of February, and I only accepted earlier this month. It was also interviewing earlier this month, so it can be pretty long. And knowing that that's normal would have been super helpful for me because I didn't know.
Yeah, going off of what Melissa said, with the PMF process, there is a little bit of wait time for you to apply. So I applied and got applied September of 21. I didn't hear back in terms of PMF application until December of 21. So there is still be some time for reviewing by Office of Public Management, OPM, and the PMF program to review all the applications. But then with the applying for agencies and departments, you do want to give yourself some time to review your resume, apply for interview, working with interviews, going to orientation sessions in person or online. So I believe in the early part of the kind of the PMF application process, each agency and department has about 3 months of orientation sessions. So Department of Agriculture, Department of State, Department of Finance, we'll have, or Treasury rather, we'll have different open houses, virtual open houses, orientations sessions, usually on Microsoft Teams, and usually there's on the PMF website, there are links and websites and based on days to go in and just hear in on what PMF coordinators and other ambassadors have to say. So do take time to just hop in on that. I was working at the time, so most of my schedule can align with the orientation meetings, but you do want to give yourself some time and grace with applying for programs at our departments as well. Because since getting in December of 21, it took me about this September of 22 to apply for and get into HHS. But there's other interviews, speaking with other people, contacting other PMFs in terms of just getting in. So it can be the stop time or the lax time in terms of getting into the PMF program and again to the department. Separate departments or agencies can depend on who applies first or who's able to get interviews and get a position. But definitely it's, if it works for your schedule, just apply early once you get into the program and set up interviews based on your schedule, whether you're working or still taking classes.
Yeah, and it really is kind of time consuming when you're applying for the positions as well, like trying to customize your resumes, things like that. It can be pretty time consuming. I know some people felt like it was like a full-time job. So yeah, also be prepared for that. It's like quite a lot to apply to, and some positions like don't have a lot of turnaround, like some of them, especially for like, I want to say Department of Defense, it was like a few days where you had to apply then.
Wow, such great insight. Thank you so much, everybody.